April the 30th, 1945, Berlin. The Fuhrerbunker, a concrete complex underground found next to the bombed-out ruins of the former Reich Chancellery, the Third Reich's governmental headquarters. A gunshot is heard around 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Stood outside the door to a study and office are a number of anxious members of the inner circle, shuffling their feet, not knowing what to do. A couple of women break out in tears as the shot is heard, and a child shouts, "That's a bullseye." Inside of his study, Adolf Hitler had shot himself while sat on the sofa next to his wife of around 40 hours. Eva Braun, now known as Eva Hitler. It was the only way out for them, as the city of Berlin, the last bastion of Nazism, was shelled beyond comprehension by the Soviet Red Army, who had made large inroads into capturing the city. There was no other way out for Hitler, especially as he learned that his friend Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, was executed by gunshot, and his corpse was then strung upside down in a huge display of public anger, with Mussolini's remains battered and brutalised. The door to the study is then opened. In bursts Hitler's valet Heinz Linger, accompanied by Private Secretary Martin Bormann, a man with a very dark history, who controlled access to the Führer. Everyone who saw the remains of the dictator inside of the Fuhrerbunker confirmed the very same thing. Hitler died from a self-inflicted gunshot. But 80 years on from the end of the Second World War, there are still millions of people out there who believe that Hitler somehow managed to escape at the end of the war through different means. Some believe he was flown out of the city and then smuggled across to South America, living in relative quiet, protected by governments who offered a way out for him. All of the history points to the fact Hitler died inside of Berlin on the 30th of April 1945, but why do people still believe that Hitler escaped to South America? Now let's get back to what the history says about what happened inside of the bunker. Now this is the official account. Throughout this video, I won't challenge your beliefs, but I'll present the facts that are well known. Now, the gunshot occurred inside Hitler's personal study around 3:15 to 3:30 p.m, an hour after Hitler and Eva Hitler went into the study after saying goodbye to those who were close around them. He had resigned himself to defeat at the end of the conflict, as breakout attempts were abandoned. It was nothing short of a dire situation for those inside of the Fuhrerbunker. Over the next few days, some would attempt to flee the complex, and some would manage to break through the Soviet lines. Described by Heinz Linger, Hitler's valet, when he entered the study, it's clear what had happened. Linger said he saw the bodies of Hitler and Eva sitting upright on the sofas. Hitler was to the right of his wife, and his head was sloped towards the right. Otto Genscher, Hitler's adjutant, entered the study after saying that Hitler was sat sunken over with blood dripping out of his right temple. He had shot himself with his own pistol. This weapon being the 7.65mm Volta PP or PPK. The gun was at his feet. Blood was dripping from his head, and a large stain was on the right arm of the sofa, and was also pooling on the rug beneath. Eva Braun, or Eva Hitler's corpse, showed no wounds, and she had died from cyanide poisoning, consuming a capsule given to her presumably by the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, and the smell inside of the study confirmed that it was probably cyanide, as the smell of burned almonds was noticeable. What happened next is also very well documented. The bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun were collected, and they were then wrapped up inside of rugs gathered from the bunker, and it was a rather undignified end. Linger wrapped Hitler up in a blanket or a rug, and then the bodies were then carried up the stairs of the Fuhrerbunker's emergency exit, which led to the garden behind the Reich Chancellery. Now, the garden was once a large green space where workers inside of the governmental building sat and ate their lunch, but at this time it was covered in bomb craters caused by the Soviet Red Army's artillery, which was still crashing down. While the corpses were being taken out of the bunker, shells were still smashing into this region. Following the bodies out of the bunker were these people, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister and Hitler's close friend, Martin Bormann, the private secretary, Arthur Axmann, the Hitler Youth leader, Erich Kempka, Hitler's chauffeur, Peter Hergel, Hitler's bodyguard, Evald Linloff, an SS officer, and Hans Reiser. The bodies were placed inside of a large bomb crater and then had a significant amount of petrol and fuel, which had been obtained previously for the destruction of Hitler's body, poured all over the corpses. This was also done for Eva Braun or Eva Hitler's. There were problems igniting the bodies though, and it was Martin Bormann who began the fire as he used paper obtained from the bunker, set fire to these, then threw them into the bomb crater onto the bodies. The fire caught and burned allegedly for hours after, and more fuel was then added to the remains. All this was happening whilst the bombing continued of the right Chancery region. At around 6:30 p.m, it was confirmed by witnesses, including Lindelof, the man who was actually tasked with the burning of the remains, that the corpses of the Hitlers had been reduced to a matter of charred bones and a pile of ashes. But the belief that Hitler managed to escape to South America at the end of the war comes from a huge amount of post-war confusion, unreliable and sketchy witness reports too. Cold War propaganda and also a fascination that people have with conspiracy and denial still plagues. But why do people believe he managed to get out of Berlin? Now, one of the biggest reasons that people believe that something strange is afoot and debatable is because of the amount of chaos and uncertainty inside of Berlin in April to May 1945. The chaos on the streets of the German capital was untold. Soviet Red Army soldiers rampaged, assaulting women en masse. They looted and raided shops and businesses and terrorised the locals. Many were executed and shot wherever they hid, and thousands lay dead on the streets. Around 4 a.m. on the 1st of May 1945, General Hans Krebs met with the Soviet General Vasily Choykov and told him about Hitler's death, and they tried to negotiate a ceasefire. Stalin was informed of Hitler's death 5 minutes after, and Stalin wanted unconditional surrender, leading to a huge amount of artillery continuing to rain down on Berlin. But Stalin wanted confirmation, and he ordered a Smersh unit, a group of special forces, to get the body of Adolf Hitler. Now, Germans themselves knew that Hitler was dead, and they were informed over a radio station, Reichssender Hamburg, that Admiral Karl Dönitz had in fact succeeded Hitler, and Dönitz told them to mourn their Führer, saying Hitler had actually died defending the capital of the Reich. On the 2nd of May, in the early hours, the Red Army did capture the Reich Chancery and the Fuhrerbunker region. They entered the bunker and found General Krebs and another, Bergdorf, dead from gunshot wounds to the head. But it took days for the Soviets to find any form of remains of Adolf Hitler. They looked around the Reich Chancery garden, knowing that that was where Hitler's body had been burned. They searched first and reported to Stalin that, in fact, nothing could be found. But then he ordered them to look again, and on the 5th of May 1945, a week after Hitler's death, the Soviets discovered 2 charred bodies in a bomb crater just outside of the bunker. Were the bodies covered over well, or were they in fact covered over by where artillery had fallen? For some reason, the bodies had been missed to begin with. Found were indeed a collection of ashes and alleged bones, but discovered was a piece of skull and a portion of jaw. The skull quite clearly had a bullet wound, and the teeth were attached to a jawbone. Hitler's dentist and a dental assistant, specifically Kaffer Heusermann, confirmed to the Soviets that these were Hitler's using X-rays, which had been taken the year before following the July 20th bombing plot in 1944, where the Wolf's Lair was hit. Now, the Soviets did not release this information, and then in July 1945, at the Potsdam Conference, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin reportedly told US President Harry Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill that Hitler might have escaped. This shocked the Allies, and this was the beginning of the chaos. Stalin himself may have truly believed this, that Hitler had escaped, but he may have also been deliberately perpetuating misinformation in an attempt to throw off the British and Americans. The Soviet newspapers even ran headlines saying that Hitler was alive and was actually being harboured by the Western powers. They continued to keep the information a secret that they had Hitler's jawbone and skull. In June 1945, they moved the remains, including the corpses of the Goebbels family, which had been found, to a Schmerz facility in Magdeburg, and the remains were then left there for 25 years, buried in secret. The Soviet disinformation and also refusal to hand over information, including significant eyewitness testimony, led to many to come up with their own theories as to what actually happened to Hitler at the end of the war. Now, the most prominent theory, which is still believed today by many, is that Hitler managed to escape to South America, and in particular, Argentina. Historians have debunked these claims and ideas, but different books have claimed that Hitler managed to somehow escape Berlin through a secret tunnel which led to him boarding a U-boat. He then emerged in South America, according to this, travelling to Argentina, where he lived under a false identity, some claiming that he actually died in 1962 in a remote Argentinian household. Now, Argentina was the centre of theories for, well, a good reason. At the end of the Second World War, many war criminals and members of the SS knew that they would be hunted and searched for. They knew that if they were found, then they would most probably be sentenced to death or hanged following a trial. This led to some escaping and travelling down rat lines, established escape routes out of Europe that saw hundreds, possibly thousands of Nazis travelling through different countries before they then got on boats to travel to South America. Argentinian President Juan Perón, who sympathised with fascist ideas and beliefs, actively allowed and facilitated the immigration of the Nazis, and some even found themselves becoming military advisors to him. A number of very high-ranking Nazis did settle in Argentina, using this as their escape. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, a very senior SS officer who organised the mass deportations of millions of people, managed to get to Argentina on a Red Cross passport under the name Ricardo Clement. He lived comfortably inside of Argentina for many years until finally Mossad agents abducted him after finding out information as to his whereabouts. There was also the Angel of Death, Josef Mengele. Mengele was known for his experiments upon children and twins within Auschwitz, and at the end of the war, he fled to Argentina in July 1949, helped by a network of former SS members. He travelled around different South American countries, but to begin with lived around Buenos Aires. Mengele was never captured, drowning in 1979 after suffering a stroke. Now, Eichmann and Mengele were wanted for years after the war, and the fact they passed through seamlessly showed that high-profile Nazis could escape and somewhat just disappear. This has led to many to believe that in fact the most high-profile Nazi of them all could repeat this, disappearing. Some remote Argentinian places, such as Bariloche, have become strongholds for German expats, and many of these towns even flew swastika flags for many years, and there were rumours of underground Nazi worship and even hidden structures holding secret communities, and possibly the most powerful Nazis of them all. This led to many considering that Hitler could have found some form of refuge amongst other Nazis. Another Nazi who managed to escape to South America was Walter Rauff, a senior member of the SS. Rauff was seen as one of the most dangerous Nazis of the war, and he was responsible for around 100,000 deaths during it, being instrumental in the creation and use of the mobile gas chambers for the slaughter of people. Rauff even managed to become an advisor to Chile in the government, and he ran a number of businesses, actually becoming very wealthy. He was also never brought to justice. These men proved that in the chaos of the end of the war, that people could escape, but surely not the most well-known man in the world could just disappear, could he? But let's go back to the bombed-out ruins of Berlin in April and May 1945. One of the biggest questions about the remains of Hitler not being his, that have been discovered is due to the issues around the cremation. It is considered that the fire, which was ignited to burn the bodies, would not have burned hot enough to reduce the remains to ashes, and that the soil around Berlin would not have allowed this to be done too. This cast doubt on the cremation, and an indoor cremation, which gets to around 4,000 degrees, can reduce a body to ashes, and some have claimed that this was not possible within Berlin at the point of time, with the body of Hitler being burned in the open. But others have claimed that the sheer amount of fuel applied to the corpse could have done this job. The bodies of the Goebbelses later found, which were burned within the same garden a short distance nearby, were rather morbidly recognisable, because they were not burned fully, and it was impossible to do this with the lesser amount of fuel that they had at their disposal. In fact, the corpse of Joseph Goebbels even had his prosthetic device still fitted to his leg, and this was relatively undamaged by the fire. Another belief about the Hitler escape myth is that the discovery of the remains is sketchy to say the least. Stalin himself at the end of 1945 ordered a second commission to investigate Hitler's death, as he was not satisfied that the remains found were of Hitler. The skull with the bullet hole in it, which was regarded as Hitler's, was actually later discovered to be belonging to an unknown woman, so this was disproven. Was this in fact Eva Braun's charred skull? The truth is today that no one knows the identity of who that skull belonged to. Was Stalin right to be unsatisfied? In 1972, the dental remains were analysed, and senior odontologists confirmed that they were in fact belonging to Hitler. Some claim that these teeth were bridges, which were meant for Hitler, and that surely in the fire they would have burned with the rest of the remains. In 2017, French forensic pathologist Philippe Charlier confirmed that the teeth on part of the jawbone were in perfect alignment to the X-rays taken of Hitler in 1944. He used electron microscopy to discover that the tartar on the teeth contained only plant fibre, which was consistent with the knowledge that Hitler was a vegetarian and that he ate only a vegetarian diet. No gunpowder residue was discovered, confirming that Hitler did not die with a gunshot through the mouth, despite what Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann later claimed. Now, despite the allure of the conspiracy theory that Hitler escaped to South America, the historical and forensic evidence for Hitler's death inside the bunker is rather overwhelming. We haven't even mentioned the eyewitness testimony yet from reliable figures such as Traudl Junger, a secretary who saw the final moments. Also, Otto Gernscher and Heinz Linger, who were there when the body was burned, confirmed that Hitler was in fact dead and that they saw the corpse. Some would try to claim that this was a double, but there's never been any evidence found that the dictator used a double. In the years after the war, these men had their accounts heavily interrogated. It has also been uncovered that certain TV documentaries, shall we say, and we use the word documentary lightly, deliberately gave information that was manipulated and not fully discussed to create a more entertaining narrative, one that is not factually correct. Stalin may for the rest of his life not believe that Hitler was dead, but he was most probably caught up in the extensive Soviet misinformation campaigns launched after the end of the Second World War. In 1970, the remains of Hitler and the ashes which were discovered were dug up and dealt with once and for all, being cremated and then scattered in the Biederitz River. The Fuhrerbunker, well, that still remains deep underground in Berlin, as it was actually impossible to blow it up and destroy it as it was so well made, but today modern Berlin has been built just over the top. Future American President John F. Kennedy later wrote that Hitler had a mystery about him, in the way he lived and in the manner of his death, that will live and grow after him. This seemingly traceless death of Hitler allowed people to create their own conclusions and believe what they wanted, and this was backed up by the fact that many high-ranking Nazis did escape to Argentina and South America. The death of Hitler isn't about the death of one single man or a dictator, it's about the death of a regime, a political ideology and an empire, one which many today still sympathise and hold beliefs for. For many of these people, the acceptance of what truly happened inside the Fuhrerbunker on the 30th of April 1945 doesn't add up and doesn't agree with what they want to believe. It's likely that for centuries to come, people will still be writing books about what happened to Adolf Hitler. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.